Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for a second or two for you all to pour in, as it were. We've had a fantastic response to this particular session, so we are expecting hundreds of people. My name is Emma Knight. I am the Chief Executive at the National Governance Association, and I am presenting today with Sam Henson, our Director of Policy and Communications. This means that you get two voices over the period, not just one, but also I think it showcases the fact that at NGA there are always a number of us working on any particular subject. This is very much a team effort. So what are we trying to cover today? Just a very short, Sam, if you could move, thank you. This is just a very short introduction to what we call our webinars, but really they are lectures, if we are honest, between 30 to 40 minutes. And just a warning, this was advertised as a 40-minute lecture, but we're going to try our absolute best to finish on the dot. So I do hope some of you have sandwiches to hand, because it will be 1:10 when we finish. This is the least interactive of the events that we run, but so please do put questions and comments into the chat. You can then see what other people are saying. We are going to try and answer them by email after the webinar, which is slightly daunting given how many of you they're on today, but there is no facility for Q&A. However, as you will hear right at the end of this session, NGA is running our leadership forums on this particular topic, and those will be very much directed at our 4 different audiences. So that's multi-academy trustees, those governing at academy level within AMAT, maintained schools, and single academy trusts. So please do register for those, and then you can really come and interrogate what we've been saying today. This recording will be shared, as always, afterwards, publicly available. So please do, if you find it useful, pass it on to others. And thank you so much for what you all do for your communities, for your schools, for your pupils. We absolutely know how much time and care and effort goes into things. So thank you. Just a very quick plug. Our annual governance survey is open now. Some of you may well have filled it in. We're seeing the numbers go up and up every day, but for those of you that haven't, please do consider. I know it's another ask, but we use this information all the time throughout the year. On Friday, I was giving evidence to the school teachers pay review body with Steve Edmonds, our Director of Advice and Guidance, and we use data from this survey. That's just one of many, many examples. Thank you. So what about today? We are going to try and run through the key announcements in the Opportunity for All white paper that was published at the end of March. And we're going to start looking at what those reforms potentially mean for governing boards and the wider sector. But clearly we can't do all of that justice in this time, but I hope it gives you a very top level summary. And particularly we will be focusing most on what the white paper tells us about a fully trust-based system. There are 2 links there, and we'll be repeating the links when we send out the slides to everybody at the end of the event. So I'm not going to repeat what exactly we said on the day of publication, but we also published some information sheets on the school's white paper and indeed the SEND green paper, which have been greeted very positively. So again, if you haven't seen those, please do have a look at them and feel free to pass them on to others, whether they're members of ours or not. So this is where I hand over to Sam, who's going to have a look at the chapters within the white paper.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. And hi, everyone. Really, really good to join you with you today. So I'm just going to go through the first 3 chapters fairly briefly before we head back over to Emma slightly later on. But firstly, let me give a bit of an introduction to the white paper itself. The publication of the Department for Education's first white paper since 2016. I'm sure many of you will remember the one before that, which we won't talk about today. But the opportunity for all, it contains some very timely and constructive insight on the future of national educational policy. It provides a real mixture of previously announced national policies with a number of new ones, and it contains some constructive insight, I think, on the future of national education policy, building on the ambitions from the government that we've been hearing all about over the last year or more, and particularly building on that ambition for developing a flourishing school system. And as we expected, as Emma said, it also sets out the government's plan for a fully trust-based system, which we'll come back to in a moment or two. The Education Secretary, he said that the release of the white paper marked levelling up in action on the day of publication. But the overall reception, I think it's fair to say, was fairly mixed. Many sector commentators noted the lack of new announcements. So this goes back to the previous point I made. Actually, a lot of what we see, particularly in the first couple of chapters, things that have been drip fed to us over the last few months. Oh, moving on too quickly there. And I think that has contributed to a slightly mixed reception. Perhaps some people thought that there would be more new initiatives, but what we've seen is a gathering together of those initiatives that had already been announced. The whole of the white paper is built around a set of aims to achieve by, in the main, 2030. There was a clear goal of 90% of children by 2030 leaving primary school with the expected standard in reading and writing and maths and so on. That's a particular announcement that hasn't actually gathered that much of the attention, but that 90% is up from 65% currently, so it's a fairly big one to be thinking about. The Secretary of State, his confident assessment was that there was already enough money in the system to deliver what has been set out, something that we've said that we're not on the same page on. So do have a look at our news page on the day. That sets exactly what our position on that is. But like I said, many hope there would be slightly more than there is. But what we do have are these 4 clear chapters, which we're going to take a look at now. Chapter 1 makes some really important and a welcome acknowledgement, really, of the need to secure sustained teaching and school improvement through CPD opportunities. It's about the profession and what is needed for teachers themselves. And in truth, we already knew about the vast majority of this. This chapter really builds on the DfE stating that it wants to improve the quality of teaching as the single most important in-school factor. But I won't dwell on this chapter for very long. There's a number of reiterated policy announcements, including the Early Careers Framework, expansion of NPQs, and the £30,000 starting salaries for teachers. Chapter 2, we start to see some of the newer announcements here. Again, lots of things that had been drip fed that have come together. But this section on curriculum really looks at what is going on in schools and how we're going to move schools forward. It does introduce a new minimum expectation on the length of the school week of 32 and a half hours by September 2023. That was probably the key announcement in this chapter. And while aimed at addressing the current discrepancy in teaching times, I think it's not statutory. It made it clear that that wouldn't be statutory, but at the same time, they have said that it's something that Ofsted will be looking at. But in theory, schools can use that time by adding more time onto break or lunchtime. So these won't necessarily, in all cases, be teaching hours. But there isn't actually lots of evidence to suggest that many schools are not at this point anyway, or not far off. So I think it will be a fairly minimal move for lots of schools. However, the white papers did, like I said, stated that Ofsted would be looking at it in future. Now, I think it's worth focus on this for a moment or two, because this requirement falls well short of the additional 30 minutes of high quality teaching time that Sir Kevin Collins previously called for in his former role as Education Recovery Commissioner. So the reaction has again been really mixed. Paul Whiteman, NAHT General Secretary, told the BBC on the day that simply adding 5 or 10 minutes to the day is unlikely to bring much, if any, benefit. And I think that kind of reaction is fairly typical of the reaction from other sector commentators out there. Other policies announced in this chapter included a literacy and numeracy test for a sample of Year 9 pupils. Again, that received a fairly mixed reaction, and legislation to modernise rules on recording attendance as well as including the establishing Oak National Academy as an arm's length curriculum body. And then chapter 3, this chapter very much leads with the commitment that every pupil who falls behind in English or maths will receive targeted support. And the government's key mechanism announced to help achieve that really takes the form of what would now come to know as the parent pledge. And the parent pledge is part of an increased emphasis on parental engagement. And this is really the flagship policy within this section of the white paper. And basically it means that there is a commitment that parents will be told, that schools will make sure you are told about if your pupils are falling behind, and you will have that commitment that the school is going to do something about it. So the pledge basically ensures that parents are kept informed about their child's progress, and we'll see schools providing evidence-based support such as tutoring going forwards. I think it's worth saying very quickly, critics have said, there's been similar initiatives announced in the past. In 2009, there was the parent guarantee. There was a parent charter announced in 1994. So this follows a pattern and is similar to those announcements as well. The only other thing I wanted to quickly mention before I hand back to Emma is one thing that's gone perhaps slightly under the radar is the potential watering down of the pupil premium, and the wording used in the white paper is that the government will look to be able to use that where needed for more general literacy and numeracy skills. So there'll be more details that we need on that, but I think it's worth being aware that a potential reshifting of the pupil premium there. And on that note, I'm going to hand over back to Emma.
Thank you very much. So yes, I'm going to start looking at chapter 4, the one about school structures, which sometimes is a shame that I spend, particularly at the moment, an awful lot of my time thinking about structures when, rhetorical question, is it structures that makes all the difference to pupils? And I know you all that are governing care deeply about all the things that Sam sort of had to introduce at lightning speed. But after all, this is our real area of expertise here, structures and governance roles. So it seemed to make sense to focus on that in particular. So the department wants, as I imagine you have all picked up through various means, schools to be either in or joining a strong trust by 2030. So there's a little bit of wiggle room after 2030 for those people who have got a plan together but haven't actually managed to convert and join a multi-academy trust. There's lots of reasons why these processes take quite a lot of time. The other thing is, it's really important that people know this, is that you are not being mandated to do it. So that's a real big difference between the 2016 white paper that had to be binned because mandation did not go down well. It was not popular. So this time the Secretary of State and ministers have decided that actually decisions will be made by governing boards of good and outstanding schools. So that's those of you that are single academy trustees and those of you that are on governing bodies of maintained schools, including federations. And by the way, there's nothing in the white paper about federations, so there isn't any prohibition on federations forming, although I don't think that's going to be an option. That is, well, I know that's not going to be an option that is being pushed, but it is still available. So there's a wee bit of tension between that idea of this vision by 2030 and the idea that it's not compulsory. And who knows what we will see. 2030 and a couple of years beyond is still quite a long time away. So whether that policy will change, we'll have a general election during that period. Your guess is as good as mine, but at the moment it is not mandatory to join a multi-academy trust, and there is no intention at the moment to make it so. So those of you on the call who are those decision makers from SATs and maintained schools, what have you been saying to us? You've all got very individual stories and histories, but what we know from our work over the past decade is almost all of you have been thinking about this at some time or other, and some of you have spent an awful lot of time exploring the options. And there are really three issues that absolutely come up time and time again in our discussions with you. First of all, there is a huge attachment to locality. And that those that are governing in single schools and federations, which tend to be smaller than multi-academy church, very much wanted that connection to locality to continue. Secondly, generally, you didn't want to be taken over by a large trust. And I'm going to go on and talk in a moment about what might be a large trust. But that idea that you might spend quite a lot of time working with other local schools, coming up with a system that worked for you, and that in the future might disappear because of merger or growth, was stopping some of you. And lastly, you wanted more evidence on the benefits to pupils. So it wasn't that you were anti the idea of looking at change, but you simply weren't convinced. Now, the department did publish a evidence case alongside the white paper, which is available for you to read, linked from our white paper page. It, however, doesn't contain the sort of detail that many of you have been asking from the Department for Education really for some time. There's much more that could have been put in there. So just think about this as an ongoing process. And that leads into that final point there. There are going to be lots of opportunities to engage with the Department for Education over this coming term, and probably beyond. Actually, all the work they've set out in the white paper cannot be completed, I don't think, within this term. So the department are really keen to hear from the sector. In many cases, their proposals are one line or even a phrase, and what they want to spend the term doing is talking to people about what that will mean in practice. So as I mentioned mentioned before, our leadership forums are one of the places where we will do that more, and the department is coming to present to you, but also to listen to you. So on to the next slide, please. I just thought it was worth flashing in front of you. And again, when you get these slides, you'll be able to look at them in a little more detail. Where do we start from now in terms of academies within the system? And you can see there our pie chart from those that are SATs or empty mats without another school within them, and then smaller mats, 2 to 5 academies, still almost a quarter of the academy sector. 6 to 10 academies, 22%. 22 is very common in this here graph, and you can see in fact that currently the largest trusts of 21 plus 31 plus are still very much the minority. So if we move on to the next slide, as you can see, I like a graph, and this is demonstrating so what's happened in terms of size of trust over the years. And what you'll see there is that red line, the number of single academy trusts has been declining over this period, that the government has been encouraging MATs. And the ones that have really grown are what you might call the middle-sized MATs, the 6 to 10 MATs and the 11 to 20 academy MATs. So if we move on to what the government is now proposing with that as your context, the government have set an expectation that most trusts will be on a trajectory. So that really is maybe the vision for the trust, to serve either a minimum of 7,500 pupils or run at least 10 schools. We like the fact that they've included pupils there as well as schools, because it makes a huge difference, doesn't it, if you're a large secondary or a tiny rural primary. That might mean that we end up with the vast majority of the sector between that sort of 10 to 20 schools size, but they haven't put a limit on very large trusts. So that's not something that the ministers currently were willing to do. I think if they were listening to the sector, and we have had lots of conversations with the department about this, we're pleased to see that sort of size, 10 to school 7,500, but we would have liked to have seen it complemented by a cap on huge trusts. Importantly though, delivering excellent outcomes is going to be the test of whether or not the MAT is strong, and therefore if they are failing, as indeed has been happening over the past few years, actually schools can be moved from one trust to another. And the department has made a commitment to better regulate school trusts. They're going to be introducing some new statutory intervention powers in order to achieve that, and they are starting a regulatory review this month indeed. So let's see if they manage to do that in May, but currently we're in local election purdah. But after that we will see some of these conversations starting around accountability, regulation, and also inspection, because at the moment Ofsted isn't able to inspect MATs as a whole, and instead they look at a number of the trust's schools at one time. So that debate has been running for several years and will continue there. This last bullet is a significant, or could be a significant change, because for the first time good schools will be able to request the DfE that actually they move to a stronger trust if it is not working as it was promised, as it should. However, big caveat, this will not be common practice. You know, the department is not going to agree to schools moving around willy-nilly over the next decade. This is in exceptional circumstances, and that's something we will be talking to you all more about over the coming term, and it may be, I'm sure it will be, a subject in our leadership forums. because it's actually quite a difficult thing to design into the law. So local authorities, what does the white paper say about their role? Local authorities will remain at the heart of the system. Really importantly, they will be championing children in the area, and they'll do that through a number of duties. Meeting the community's needs for good school places. They're going to have a bit of a strengthened role in overseeing local admissions, and I'm sure that's something we'll come back to over the coming term. And also be given new powers in order to make sure they can deliver those responsibilities. If a local authority wants to, as part of their local strategic plan, bring their maintained schools into the academy system, there will be new powers given to enable that to happen. Again, we don't know what those powers will look like. That's part of the ongoing conversation. The bit that you have, I no doubt, heard quite a lot about, it's had extensive coverage in the education press, lots of blogs written on this, is that local authorities will be able to establish new MATs where too few strong trusts exist. So there's a big question about when, where will it be decided that too few strong trusts exist. Really, really important though, those trusts are not something halfway between being a maintained school and being a MAT. They will be a MAT like any other trust. They won't be controlled by the local authority. There's a lot of language out there that's suggesting that the local authority will have some sort of role in running them. They won't. This is more about sponsorship than running. So for example, you may have seen in the white paper that there will still be limits on the number of local authority connected trustees. As soon as local election period is over, we're hoping to see a paper that expands on this, because a lot of people have got the wrong end of the stick on this one. If you can move on to the next, please. There will also be new standards for MATs, and we have had this explained to us by the department. It wasn't initially 100% clear what these might involve, but what the department is saying is there are so many requirements on trusts, some in law, but a lot in funding agreements, and what they want to do is bring those all together in one place and add any new ones that are needed to fill gaps. So this is one from the white paper on collaboration, which we're really, really pleased to see. So there will be a duty on trusts as well as local authorities to collaborate to ensure the best outcomes for children, including in admissions and attendance. So that's, I think, is an important part of the system. We absolutely welcome that trusts, can't just retreat into their own little space and not work with others across the area. And then, what is a strong trust? I haven't been able to read the chat while I've been talking, but that was certainly one of our questions and has been for some time. But what do you mean by a strong trust? So the department has come up with these 5 pillars, which we will be seeing more detail behind over the coming term. Delivering high quality and inclusive education. We actually think those should be 2 different pillars, because actually there's quite a lot more to inclusive education than simply improving the quality of teaching within the classroom. There are different aspects to that, so we'd like to see inclusive education separated out into a sixth pillar. School improvement, strategic governance, really pleased obviously to see that there, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking to the department about. We'll be talking to you about, getting under the skin of that. How do you define that in detail? What does it actually mean? How can you prove that you've got strong strategic governance? And we will, I'm sure, be talking about that with the department in the leadership forums in May and June. Strong and effective financial management, that won't surprise you if you think about your core functions, that's there as well. And then lastly, really important, so pleased to see this, we've been really promoting governing boards roles as employers over the last couple of years, and I know you as governing boards are really concerned to ensure the well-being and development of your staff. So that will be the fifth pillar. So in which case, I'm going to hand back to Sam to talk in more detail about governance itself.
Oh, thanks so much, Emma. Great. So obviously we've touched on governance, but one of the key things that was included in the white paper was this focus on the importance of local governance arrangements within a MAT. And really we see this as there's a real acknowledgement here that local governance within multi-academy trusts, which is often referred to as local governing bodies or academy committees, or various names used for whatever model you use within a trust. But that local focused tier within the MAT governance structure, there's a real acknowledgement that this is part of the future of the system, and the DfE have included it in its expectation for all MATs having local governance arrangements for their schools. It's not prescriptive around what that looks like. There is a conversation that the department want to have now before they say any more on this. This is something that NGA are very much engaged with the department on this conversation at the moment. But I think it's worth coming back to a specific point that the department have said, and that is that local governance is there so that trusts continue to be responsive to parents and responsive to local communities. So that gives you an idea of that remit that many trusts we know already operate with a local level. Local governance within MATs is something that the NGA have written on a lot. So we've got a link to our most recent blog and a thought piece on what local governance within MATs looks like, and the different approaches and what we've learned from the past. And the reality is that actually, whilst there is the possibility of taking a different approach, actually most trusts have followed suit and taken a very similar approach, and that is to have a local governing body or an academy committee for each school. The agenda, the actual remit of those academy committees can look quite different, but by and large that's the model that's been followed to date. Local governance within MATs is something that we have said forms the bridge between the trust board and its schools, and so this inclusion is really significant, and we think it's something that should be applauded. NGA's really been a leading voice on this, and hopefully as you read that blog, as you have a look at our thought piece, you will look at the wealth of the evidence base that we have that informs our thinking on this. Local governance within MATs is something that we've been asking about for a long time as well, when we've been engaging with members and other people. Our 2021 annual governance survey found that just 3% of those governing MATs said they had no form of local tier whatsoever. So that gives you an idea that actually this is really a key part of the way that most trusts, the vast majority of trusts, operate. Yet consideration and appreciation for the actual full potential of local governance within trusts has not always been given the airspace it needs. And so we've kind of really taken a step back to think about why do we value it, and what are the things that we think need to be there in order for it to work. So in terms of why we value it, this is why we've come up with these 5 points here. It enables evidence-based governance, visible governance, accountable governance. It provides those checks and balances and a collaborative approach. We've got into detail about each of these individual 5 aspects within the blog, so do do have a look at that. But just quickly, evidence-based, it equips the trust with that school level intelligence to strengthen decision making, which is key. In terms of visible governance, it creates a powerful advocate for the trust's vision, the way they want to do things as well. Accountable governance, it keeps the trust answerable to its stakeholders, which is really, really important. Those checks and balances, it provides a valuable source of challenge to the trust board, and that's not always been talked about positively in the past, but actually we think that's really key. It helps the trust board to avoid going down that line of groupthink. And then collaborative governance, it enables that local focus on accountability and helps keep the trust grounded in the importance of place, which I think, as Emma said at the beginning, is really, really key to the trusts that we speak to. So NGA in our thinking on this, we're going to be upfront with you. These are the things that we have been saying in our MAT network to the DFE. These are the things that we think are really important to get local governance working well. And in 2021, we released a report called MATs Moving Forward, which was a follow-up to a 2019 report that we did. Now that covered governance in MAT governance in its entirety and the issues that MATs face, but actually local governance within trust was a key element of that. We've lent on a very wide evidence base to come up with these suggested expectations and standards of local governance. So firstly, communication, that getting that right, we've seen time and time again, without a good approach to communication within the governance of a trust, then it can fall quite flat. And we think that really needs to include meetings with the trust board, chair and vice chair, and chairs at a local level as well. Separation, that's all about the trust maintaining a clear distinction between accountability through governance by the trust board and its committees and accountability through line management, and making sure there's very separate, clear lines there. Investment in a governance professional, you will know how important that is to us, and actually we've seen time and time again that for MAT governance to work well, it's so reliant on having that expertise to guide the success of the governance within the trust. Clear delegation, a scheme of delegation, still really key to getting those lines of accountability right and ironed out, and everyone is clear on who is doing what. And that delegation needs to show that it's the local tier operating as the eyes and ears at school level. And then number 5, the local tier doesn't actually need to have its own committees. Lots do, but our argument is don't make things more complicated than they need to be. If you're starting to operate with a 4th or 5th tier, adding excessive layers, then that can really complicate the way things are done. Number 6, a meaningful and accepted role in challenge. You don't remove the local committee simply for being challenged, is the argument that we put across, and actually there should be an appeals process there. Number 7, we've seen this quite a bit actually, but it's important to remember that actually when we're talking about governance, that it's reliant on that volunteer force. We don't want to mix up the executive and the governance within the trust. And then number 8, the trust board is there. Everyone knows they're there. They're aware of their role, and they're not hidden away. And actually, they're forthcoming and they want to interact with local governors One example was inviting them to the AGM. Input from the local tier, namely the chair in performance management. We've seen this, lots of trusts have operated this way for a long time and it's worked really well, but it doesn't happen in all trusts. But we think that can be really key, and likewise in the actual recruitment of heads as well. A whole trust governance development plan. Each tier, each layer needs to know what each other's doing. They need to come together, learn together, train together, but also look at what other trusts are doing as well, and refreshing practice based on what you're seeing from other trusts. And then that contribution to school improvement and awareness of a school's budget and spending plan. Actually, you might have different roles, but we think actually that there has to be a clear link between the role of the local governor and school improvement, and they need to know how money is being spent for their school within the trust as well. Actually, lots of trusts operate now where money is centralized, but actually that transparency is what we're talking about here, and that we've seen that work so well in the past. So that really brings us to the end of today's webinar. I know we've tried to cram in a lot there, but the good news is this isn't the last opportunity for you to become engaged in this conversation and get involved. In fact, it's really just the beginning. Like Emma said earlier, today isn't particularly interactive at all. Actually, we have a whole group of sessions, our leadership forums, which will enable you to get involved more in the debate with the NGA and also with the Department for Education. So do come along, do sign up, get your chairs, get your heads as well to sign up to these sessions. We've got our first one on the 16th of May. If you're already in a trust at a local level, and you are a local governor, you're part of an LGB, please come along on the 17th of May. We'd love to see you. We're really keen to get your viewpoint as well. So do come along to that. And then we have a session for those of you who in schools who are not yet part of the trust, and also those of you who are part of a single academy trust as well. So do sign up to those sessions. You can have your say. You can speak directly to the department and let them know what you think as they deliver their messages directly to you as well. Just for those of you who've joined us who aren't members of the NGA, aren't clear on what we do, what we have on offer, this is just to show you just a small taste of some of the things that we have in our membership. A magazine, among them a weekly newsletter. So do click the link there and have a look at our membership. And here on this side, just give you another example, the many things on offer. So if you thought all we did was webinars, you can see actually we do an awful lot more than just webinars. There's lots there. So do engage with that. And then finally, before I finish and let you all go back to your afternoon, and just a quick reminder, as Emma said earlier, of our survey, please, we'd be so grateful if you could contribute to that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. And as said, the slides will be available afterwards, and the recording will be going onto our website. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.